Right, well, this is the latest addition to my house. It's a Tesla Powerwall 2. It stores 14 kilowatt hours of electricity that comes off my solar panels. It's been running now for about 2 weeks. I've had it installed, and in the past week it's been pretty sunny, sort of like it is now. The solar panels, which I also got upgraded, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see them out here, but I added 6 panels, giving me a total of 6.5 kilowatts. So there's now 26 250 watt panels, and as you can see from the top 13, they are now set to 37 degrees inclination, so that in theory during winter there's a high yield, and then obviously in summer the 22 degree ones will get a high yield. So average across the two of them, I should get a much better daily yield of power from them. As you can see, today is really quite sunny. It's been sunny since about 10 a.m. when the fog lifted, and in that time the panels, they were peaking at around 4.8 kilowatts. We'll see what my generation was today. Let's see. So today was 16.9 kilowatt hours, more than enough to charge the battery and push some out to the grid. And that's sort of what I was hoping to get in these winter. Like back when I didn't have the, even on a sunny day like today, before I had the extra 1.5 kilowatts of panels, and before I had the rear panels inclined, I was lucky to get 10 kilowatts on a day like today. So I'm seeing at least another 6 kilowatt hours ish in the same conditions, just by adding the extra 1.5 kilowatts of panels, but also by improving the efficiency of one of the strings. And so I figured if I could get if I could average around 12 kilowatt hours a day during winter, I reckon that would be enough to make the battery worthwhile, because that would get it close to fully charged, because I primarily run with a 10% sort of reserve on the battery, so that way the battery will kick in if the grid power goes out, and only then will it dip into that last 10%. So that would be if it was like a really horrible week of overcast. Conceivably I'd be on that 10% limit, but then the power will keep that 10% reserve unless the power cuts out. And the way that works is this extra box above my main switchboard. So this is my main switchboard in here, and this holds the energy gateway. There's not much to see because it's all sort of bare circuitry, so they've got this big cover over it so that nobody can get themselves electrocuted. So that's all sort of in there sort of, as you can kind of see in here, there's like a little data stick cable that connects off to the Powerwall, and there's like an energy gateway, which is basically a little Linux box that talks to the Powerwall. It monitors the solar generation and it monitors the grid draw, as well as the grid status. And so if the grid disappears, it tells the Powerwall to turn on and all that kind of nice stuff. We did a test run. We actually turned off the mains to see what would happen when the sun was shining, and the Powerwall just kicked on and everything kept working. So it's basically like a UPS for the house, although there is a brief loss of power for like 100 or 200 milliseconds while it switches on. So you still need UPSs if you want to protect your electronic equipment from having a brief outage. But other than that, yeah, it was straight away. And the other cool thing was this inverter is a grid tie inverter. So in theory, it only works when the grid's present. But the cool thing about the way the Powerwall fails is it pretends to be the grid. So even though the grid was out, because we'd switched off the mains, the Powerwall kicked in, provided that grid signal, and then the inverter continued to take solar power and continue to pump that into the house. So it would continue to charge the batteries even if there was no grid, which I think is pretty cool. It means you don't need to worry about setting up any sort of islanding features, which would be like I think they call them there's the Sunny Boy, and I think there's the Sunny Island, which basically provides that islanding feature for these grid-tied inverters. Basically, the Powerwall was being that equivalent job of what the Sunny Island would do. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And I also had a chat with the Tesla installers, because they came and sort of oversaw part of the install. So I just had the question of what happens if the grid goes out, the battery's fully charged, and the sun's beating down on the panels. I was obviously concerned about what would happen about, the inverter generating possibly 5 kilowatts of energy, and there being nowhere for it to go because, say, the battery's fully charged. And they informed me that the Powerwall will start doing some phase shifting. So it'll do a phase shift on the primary power line, which signals the inverter to become less efficient. And so it will actually basically stop creating that power, and in theory it'll match whatever the draw is on the house. So, if I have the air conditioning on or doing some washing or something, it'll basically just tell the solar inverter to only generate enough power to cover that and no more. So if that ever happens, I guess it'd be in my interest to turn everything on and consume as much power as I can, or at the very least keep an eye on the battery, and once it's fully charged, do that. But yeah, thought I'd sort of give you a quick update on the Powerwall. Actually, I think I can probably show you some graphs for this previous week, so I might do that in a second. Right, well, here's the view from my home automation software. This is basically up here is a graph of my smart meter. The cyan bits there is solar generation. The green bits below here are me pushing to the grid, basically, selling back my excess solar. And what you would have seen before I had the Powerwall would have been, before it was green, there would have been some red to indicate where I was taking power out of the grid. And as you can see, there's no red on this graph, which is an indication that, at least for the last 2 days, this is just 2 days worth here, that for the last 2 days I've been completely covered by solar plus the Powerwall battery. And then in this graph below here, this is a sort of a graph of the state of charge of the Powerwall. And as you can see earlier in the week, so this is back on the 9th of August, I was on this little grey bit at the bottom here is my 10% reserve. So you can see I was on the reserve, because earlier in the week it was overcast. And so I didn't get a full charge this day, and he got from about 1 kilowatt up to 10, so I think I got about 9 kilowatts, 2 kilowatt hours put into the battery on that day, so clearly not much sun that day. And then this is basically the sun's gone down at this point here, which is 5 p.m. And then that's the house, and then that's me turning on the heater, and then that's just the normal draw of the house, which is about 300 watts. And then that's the morning, and I've turned the heater back on, and I've gone back down to almost hitting my 10% reserve. Then the sun's come out, and then obviously that day was a sunny day, because I went from 1.5 kilowatt hours up to 12 and a half almost. So that's a pretty good charge, and then that's me coming home, and it was a warm day that day, so I didn't turn on the heater. And then in the morning it was cold, turned on the heater again, and then another sunny day. And here you can see I've maxed out the battery. That's the battery fully charged. And you can see the last 3 days I've fully charged the battery, all 3 days, and in fact again today fully charged the battery again. Today was sort of on and off, overcast and sunny. So you can see there's like little slowdown bits in the graph here to indicate that it slowed down a little bit when the cloud cover was over, which indicate these gaps here in the top one when the cloud cover came over. But overall, clearly I put in enough power to fully charge it. So at 9 AM this morning, it was at 4.3 kilowatt hours, and then by 1 PM, 1:15, it was fully charged at 14 kilowatt hours. So it's basically 10 kilowatt hours put in there in a few hours. Yeah, so you can see from this graph here that since the 9th of August, I've been completely 100% solar powered. So, obviously during when the sun's out, I'm using the solar power. And then at night, I'm using the battery, which is the downhill bits. So during the day on the solar, at night on the battery, day, night. And you can see the last 1, 2, 3, 4 days, I haven't dipped into the grid at all, which corresponds with the graph above, which indicates I've not touched the grid because there's no red in that graph, which would indicate drawing from the grid. So battery definitely works as advertised. If I get a couple of hours of sun, I don't foresee myself needing to draw any power from the grid. And if I get more than a couple of hours of sun, I will end up basically exporting power into the grid each day at the end of each day. So definitely the combination of upgrading the panels. So now I've got an oversubscribed number of panels for my solar inverter. So I've got 6.5 kilowatts of panels going into a 5 kilowatt inverter. You can check the SMA stats on that, but that's perfectly within tolerances of what SMA spec for their inverters. You're allowed to overdrive them that much. They will never generate more than 5 kilowatts, but they will happily accept more than 5 kilowatts on their input, and they'll just dump the excess power. And then obviously doing the inclination of half the panels, like basically one string is now at 37 degrees, which basically matches my latitude, increases my yield quite significantly for the winter months. So I'm now seeing 10 or more kilowatt hours of generation on a typical winter's day, providing it's not overcast, obviously, which we get a lot of overcast days. And I've also got over here, I've got like a little, this is watching the actual energy gateway. So I've done some debugging. So there's like the URL up there, which gives you an idea of how you can query the energy gateway directly. And you can see at the moment my solar is generating about 300 watts, which makes sense because it's about 3 PM on a winter's day, so the sun's pretty much gone at this point. The house is consuming almost exactly 300 watts, a little bit over, peaking. Oh, there you go. The fridge just came on, so you saw it spike there to 1500, and now it's gone down to about 400 or so, which means the surplus is coming out of the battery. So the battery is providing 130 watts to make up the difference between what the currently solar generation is and what the house is actually consuming. And then you can see the grid is just hovering around zero. It goes like plus or minus 30 watts. And that happens just because the energy gateway is it's reactive to the grid, so it is basically monitoring the grid, I think, once a second. So there's always a little tiny, like as because the power consumption is spiky, there'll be about a 1 second draw before the Powerwall knows to boost or drop its generation to match the current grid. So you'll see that this always kind of hovers around zero. And in fact, if you zoom in on, so let's zoom in on like the nighttime here, you can see there's all the spikes, but the spikes are tiny. That's like that's 20 watts. The average there is probably around about 5 to 10 watts probably across that, but you can see the spikes, and that's just that's just caused by the 1 second delay between the energy gateway reading what my draw is on the grid and then it telling the Powerwall to match. So you're always going to get a little bit of spikiness on the really low levels there. But the hope, of course, is that you make all that back up with these bits where you push in later. And of course, if you wanted to get rid of that, you would literally just go off grid, because if you weren't on grid, the inverter would know exactly what your draw is, because you will be drawing straight from it, and it will obviously match your draw. That's all there is there. If you find this interesting and you're interested in more Powerwall videos, or videos with barking dogs, or videos about Tesla cars, feel free to subscribe. I don't generate very many videos, kind of slack, so you shouldn't get spammed with lots of notifications, but I appreciate the subscribes. It sort of means I'm doing something right. And if not, maybe just a like on the video. A like on the video just to keep my dog quiet. Sorry. I think she wants to play. I better go. Bye.